Okay, so I'm going to be recording this part of the session. If anybody has any objections with the recording, please say so now. Okay. And so we were talking about cardinality, and we were talking about the different types of cardinality that exist. And so again, first we established the relationship. And so the relationship is going to be this link that exists between one entity and another. And then we define the cardinality, and the cardinality identifies how many of the instances of one entity can be related at any certain time with the instances of the other entity and vice versa. And we talked about three types of cardinality. I'm sorry, one-to-one. And the one-to-one cardinality had to do with one instance is only related to one instance of each entity. And an example of that, we talked about the vaccines, for example. So one registrant or patient is going to receive one vaccine. One vaccine is going to be given to one registrant, regardless of the amount of doses. Then there's a one-to-n cardinality, where one entity, instance of an entity, is related to many instances of the other, but not the other way around. Okay. And so this is the second type of cardinality that we have. The third type of cardinality is a many-to-many cardinality. So, just an example of this. Remember that we were talking about professors and courses. So I, as a professor, can teach many courses, but the course in particular is just taught by one professor. So that's an example of one-to-many. And here, the N-to-M cardinality is when we have many instances of one entity can be related to many instances of the other. And so here we talked about students and professors. For example, a professor can teach many students, a student can be taught by many professors, and vice versa. So these are many-to-many. And we were talking about this, and we were seeing some examples. And I asked you guys to kind of get together and talk about these. And we had discussed two of them. So students and faculty, and somebody says students learn from faculty. That's the example I just gave. So a student can learn from many faculty or professors, and professors can teach many students. Okay, I'm just going to write this down here. So it's faculty, professors, right? That's what we're talking about. And we were discussing clients and contracts, and we gave many examples of different variations of the cardinality in clients and contracts. So we talked about clients have or sign contracts. And so this could be a one-to-many relationship, meaning one client can have many contracts, but the contract would be signed, each contract would be signed just by one client. That could be one situation. It could be collective, like we mentioned, like some collective bargaining agreement. So one client can sign many contracts, and contracts can be signed by a group of clients or many clients. That could be another situation. And then there could be a type of contract that's one-to-one, where there's a client and a contract, and only one client can sign that contract, and that contract can only be signed by that client. So any of these situations could apply and could be valid, and this would be depending on the situation. Right now, I'm just giving you a couple of entities and asking you to relate them. We haven't given more context with regards to these entities. Once we have the context, and remember that the context comes out of the analysis stage, we have usually clearer information to be able to identify which one would apply. Okay. Now we've got employees and projects. What relationship did any of you identify for that one? Jose Miguel, go ahead, please. You wanted to ask something or participate? Go ahead.
Yes, we have employees work on projects, and we have.
Oh, give me a moment. So employees work on projects, perfect. And did you identify a cardinality for that? What did you
Yes,
identify?
we have one too many. And we thought it like there's one project in which a lot of employees
Okay. The 1 to n, that's correct. That's, I mean, that's fine. So employees work on projects. So the logic here is that a project can be worked on by many employees.
yeah.
Okay, but each employee is only assigned to one project, right?
That's how we thought it, like the
Okay,
situation.
that could be a situation. That's correct. Um, Carmina, go ahead.
My team and I put employees work on or also manage projects,
Mm,
and we pulled many to many
yeah.
because, oh, sorry,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Mhm.
because a project can be managed or work on by many employees, and employees can work on many projects.
Mhm. That could also be an alternative. So we could have employees work on a project, or another alternative is manage projects. And in that situation, we could have a 1 to n, or we could also have a n to m, where we could have one employee managing or assigned to a project, or we could have many of them assigned. Any of those two situations could be also valid depending on the situation. And I think it's interesting, the other situation that you identified. So you guys said manage. That could be another situation, because an employee can work on a project. So we may have many employees working on many projects, and a project can be worked on by many employees. But then we could have employees manage projects. And so in that sense, an employee can manage many projects, but each project can only be managed by one employee. So any of these situations could apply depending on the context. Okay, good. Um, let's talk about clients and charges in credit cards. Let me explain that a little bit. So we've got clients. So client or a customer, and we have credit cards, and there is a charge in the credit card, meaning we bought something and that's registered in the credit card. Go ahead, Estrella, please. I don't know if you were going to participate or ask a question, but go ahead, please.
No, yes. Um, uh, Wait, just a minute. So my team and I put clients' own charges, and we put one too many.
Okay, let's analyze that one. So client's own charges in a credit card. So let's analyze that specific situation. And owns could be correct. That's fine. Let's say, Estrella, that you have a credit card. Okay, one credit card, and you buy something with that credit card, anything. Um, do you agree that you can make many purchases with your credit card?
Yes.
Yes, right. You can make many purchases, right? So that part of the relationship is many. So you as a client can make many charges, right? But let's say that you buy something specifically. What if you had all the money in the world in your credit card, Estrella? What would you buy?
Mm.
Anything.
I don't know, a car.
A car. Perfect. Big buy. You buy a car. You buy a Lamborghini and you charge it to your credit card. And then suddenly in your bank statement, it appears Lamborghini, I don't know how much money. A charge appears in your credit card for that purchase. That purchase is unique and only corresponds to the purchase you made. Okay? So what do I mean? That charge is unique to the credit card that you made, because that charge has an identifier and it's unique. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult to trace it. Would you agree?
Yes.
And so this means that the type of relationship would be more towards 1 to n, meaning one client can have many charges, okay? But the particular charge, each particular charge is associated to a specific client, okay? Because it would be very complicated if you made a charge to your credit card and let's say that the Lamborghini costs $500,000, and then suddenly that $500,000 could be yours, could be Enya's, could be Jose Miguel's, could be Andrea's, could be mine. It has to specifically link to one person or one client. Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, so here the relationship would be more towards 1 to n. Okay, own, I think it's a good way to establish the relationship. Own, another one could be clients make charges.
It's because we thought like I have one credit card and I can buy a lot of things, so that's why we thought like one too many.
No, it actually is 1 to many. With that credit card, you can buy many things, so it's many. But each of those things you bought correspond only to you.
Okay.
That's why it's 1 to many. So you can make many charges, but each of those charges you made only correspond to you. Okay, that's why it's 1 to many. That's why it's not many to many, because you might make many charges, but imagine if each of those charges were related to many people. They have to be related to one client, and so that's why it would be 1 to many. But it is correct what you said, that you as a client own or make many charges, but each of those charges is directly linked or associated just to you. Okay?
Professor, 1 to n is one too many.
Yes.
It's because we put 1 to m.
To m?
Uh-huh.
Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It's the same.
Yeah, the notation is 1 to letter. You usually use n or m. We usually use n as a generic letter to indicate many. Okay?
Okay.
And n to m to differentiate, to not put n to n, because that would be confusing. But it's basically 1 to letter. Okay, and usually the letter we use is n, but if you put an m, it's not incorrect. Okay, good.
Okay.
Good job there, you guys. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question.
Remember to raise your hands and turn on your camera so I can
Right.
see you when you pop up.
So
Javier,
I was kind of thinking of that case, and I agree with the 1 too many, but I was thinking, like, what if it was like a company credit card?
That's a good observation. It's a good observation, Javier. The account is a company account, but even when you have a company account, let's say you work for me and it was a company account,
Right.
you, Javier, would have your own credit card with a number, and I or Estrella, I don't know, somebody else would also have their credit card with an identifier. So even if it's a company account, the
Right.
charges are somehow identified to who made them.
Okay.
And I know this because we don't use company credit cards, or I'm not at that pay level yet at Sentis, but I know my wife does when she used to, and she used to do trips. So she has a company credit card, and when she does the charge, there's a statement that indicates that it was in her credit card, and those are used for expense reports. So thinking about a database,
Yeah.
imagine that you had a company with many employees, and in the end, you gave them company credit cards. Javier, would you agree that you would want to know who made what charge, and that should be individually linked just to that person that made the charge, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or else it would be really confusing to have 20 people with 20 credit cards, and you're going to have 200 charges, and you don't know who made which. So somehow the charge does have to be unique. But the setting where there's a company that has company credit cards could also apply, but it would probably still be 1 to n.
Thank you.
Good observations there. Good. Let's talk about books and Enya. Go ahead.
We put on this relationship that books are read by users.
Okay, books are read. Um, and in this, the context, it says library there, so it's kind of assuming you bring out a book from the library. So books are read by users. Okay. We could also say that books are requested by users. We can use many adjectives there. And how did you guys identify the relationship there? The cardinality, I'm sorry.
We put many to many.
Okay. A book can be, so one, that's a good observation. One book in the library, and think about the SETI's library. Okay. And let's do this. Let's do this. So not confused. I'm going to use the relationship that you established, which is read. So the verb is to read. Okay. So let's think about any book in the library. That book in the library could be read by many users at any time. And a user could read many books. Okay, so that's the logic with that you established for the end-to-end, right?
Yes.
Okay, that could be a correct approach. And here's important: the verb we're using, where we're talking about reading. Okay, so a book at any time could have, and actually in the registry of the library, there should be a list of all of the people that requested to read a book, for example, and that could help you kind of trace if the book is there or anything like that. Okay, good. Good job. Let's talk about clients in car rentals. Who can tell us about that one? Clients and car rentals, cars or car rentals.
We put clients rent cars.
Right, perfect. That's actually the perfect relationship there. Rent cars. Okay. And what type of relationship did you establish there?
One-to-one.
Let's talk about that. How did you get to one-to-one?
Because we thought about a client only rent one car like at a time, and a car is rent by a client. That's why.
So the logic there, and we're talking about instances, you're thinking about the specific client and the specific car. Now that's good. So if I go to a car rental, or let's say you, Andrea, you go to a car rental, you go to rent a car to, oh, I forgot the name of the car rental. There's a car rental here in El Centro. I totally forgot the name. Well, you go to Sosa's car rental, I don't know. And you go there and you want to rent a car. And so you are the client, Andrea, okay? And you're responsible for the rental because I'm going to rent you the car. And so you're the client. And in this situation that you're talking about, kind of thinking about a personal use or a company use, you're going to select a car and I'm going to rent that car to you. And that specific car, let's say that you rent, let's say that Estrella and I work together and the Lamborghini that she just bought is for my rental company and you're renting the Lamborghini that costs $1 million, okay? So that specific Lamborghini is only rented by you and you are renting only that specific Lamborghini, okay? That's the logic, right? Okay, that could work. In this situation, Andrea, you are considering that case that I'm just explaining, right? Okay, you're not considering, for example, a situation that might also be valid, but it's a different situation, where you could say, Andrea, you're arriving at the car rental and you say, you know what, me and my friends, we want to do a trip to El Valle de Guadalupe for Semana Santa. And you just won the SETI sorteo, Andrea, and you say, I want to take all of my classmates. Maybe Professor Sosa, but since he talks too much, maybe not, but at least I'm going to take all of my classmates. And so the rental company tells you, okay, Yeah, you know what? But it's 20 people. They don't fit in one car. Or do you have a van? I don't have vans. I just have cars. Would you agree that you would have to rent more than one? That could be another situation where you're still one client that rents more than one vehicle. However, I don't know if many rental companies allow that. That would be a special situation. I don't know if because I actually don't rent cars. I've never rented a car. My wife
Yes,
has.
you can,
There are situations where you can do that, and
but there's a limit.
there's a limit. You can't rent all.
Mhm.
You can't just arrive. Andrea just won the Cetis Sorteo Millonario, and she's like, I want to rent
No.
all. Usually a limit. There might be situations where maybe because of legal or insurance restrictions, the company might say, no, you know what, Andrea, if you want to rent 5 cars, there has to be a responsible driver that's going to rent each of the cars. We can't have you, because you're not going to be driving the 5 of them at the same time, right? So there might be situations where this could be 1 to N, depending on the specific case. But the logic you guys established with the 1-to-1, that could be okay. Okay. Yeah, those Valle de Guadalupe trips are really, really fun when they can be done. Let's see, faculty and classes. We'd already talked about that one. What do we have here? Faculty. I'm going to help faculty teach classes. And what had we said about the relationships there? The cardinality. I'm sorry.
Many too many.
If we're talking about this is sort of academic terminology, and I am going to change this. I'm going to change it from courses to classes, just because of my OCD here. Okay. If we have faculty teach courses, then who participated? I didn't see who said the many to many?
Me, Estrella.
Oh, Estrella? Okay. Okay, so we've got, now if it were courses, the many to many would apply. Why am I saying that, or just being specific? And again, this is just my OCD. Course is data analysis and organization, or I'm going to be simpler. Course is differential calculus, okay? That's a course that's in an academic program. That course can be taught by many faculty, and a faculty can teach many courses. So that's why that would be many to many. The differential calculus course group G1, which is the specific course taught to the global program industrial engineers in 2nd semester, that is a class. And in that case, a class is a course in a group. And a course in a group, that can only be taught by one professor. Okay. But if we're talking about courses in the academic program, then N to M would make sense. If we were talking about classes, then that would be 1 to N. But if we're talking about courses in the academic program, then yes, we can have many professors teaching many courses. Okay. Okay, questions with this?
Professor,
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't get it, the difference between 1 to M and M to M to
remember,
the class and course.
I'm assuming it's Carmina, right? Just
Yeah.
remember to either raise your hands or preferably please turn on your cameras, or else I don't know who's participating. Okay, so the difference, Carmina, is course is so course, for example, is differential calculus. I'm going to say it in Spanish, is materia. So differential calculus is a course that the industrial engineers take. Oh, well, it's a course that every engineering program takes, right? That's the course. The class is the specific course for a specific group. okay? So the course is differential calculus, right? But differential calculus group 01 for the mechatronics engineers, that's a class. So the class is the specific instance of the course with a group. And so therefore, if we're talking about courses, well, yeah, the differential calculus course can be taught by many professors, and a professor can teach many courses, right? Would you agree with that? But if we're talking about a class, which is the course and the group, then a professor can teach many classes, but one particular class can only be taught by one professor. Okay. And again, right now we're just kind of playing around with the entities, but further on, when we see situations, the situation or the context is going to give us much more specific information to be able to define which cardinality is more appropriate. Okay. Okay. Questions with this before we move on to the next thing. Okay. Oh, let me pop over here. Now let's talk about this. Remember that we kind of hinted that we were also going to have to think about sometimes the maximums and minimums. So right now we're just talking 1 to n, or 1 to 1, 1 to many, or many to many, right? But sometimes we're going to have to define ranges just to be a little bit more clear, because, for example, sorry about that. I don't know, employees work on projects or employees manage projects. So, and I think I was talking with one of the teams, I think I was mentioning this to Andrea when we were coming back from the breakouts or something like that. Well, what would the relationship be there in employees and projects? So can an employee work on many projects and a project be worked on by many employees? Yes. But so can an employee work on 1,000 projects? Well, in theory, yes, but in practicality, no. Can students take 50 courses in a semester? Well, in theory, yes, but even in practicality, that would be virtually impossible. So there are limits to the cardinality where we have maximums and minimums. So let's talk about a little bit about that. Let's talk about employees and children. But by the way, when I say children, it's that they are somehow their parents, okay? Either biological or adopted, but you have a relationship there. What could be the relationship between employees and children? Anybody? What could we put there in relationship? Anybody? Has, yeah. Employees, let me just, the Zoom controls sometimes are so annoying. Have I, this is going to be recorded. Have I told you my theory about who my theory, this is the theory I have. If I had enough time to write a novel, if I had enough time to write, I would really love to write and be a novelist. Have I told you my idea? You can steal this idea, by the way. Just if you do steal it, just in the credits when you get the Pulitzer or whatever, just say thank you because somebody gave me the idea and it was Professor Sosa. Have I told you my premise for a book that has to do science, sort of a science fiction book that has to do with the pandemic?
Yes.
I did, right? Did I tell you what was who was the main antagonist in my fiction book that had created the virus?
No, I don't think you did.
My fiction, this is fiction, and if it's true, then the FBI is probably going to come to my house and you probably won't see me again. But my sort of science fiction novel for this is that the pandemic was created by Zoom. Okay, so the virus was created by Zoom. And so what was the frequency of use of Zoom before the pandemic? I mean, some of us used Zoom already, but did you guys use Zoom so intensely like you do now?
No.
Oh, right. Just a show of hands, how many of you remember or used Skype? Skype. Oh, and if I found it so annoying in Spanish when some people from certain parts of Mexico said Skype, Skype. It's not Skype, it's Skype. It's not Skype. Some of you used Skype, right? How many of you used FaceTime before to kind of talk to people? Okay, I did too. When did I use Skype or FaceTime? I used Skype or FaceTime to talk to my wife and daughter when I was traveling around the world, when I was in China, when I was in Minnesota, when I was traveling a lot a few years ago. I used it a lot, and to talk to my parents. You probably used it to talk to friends that weren't close by, or maybe do the typical, oh, I'm going to call my parents, or I'm going to call this friend and we're going to do FaceTime, right? But did you use it as a tool, as a necessary tool, as you use it right now? Right now, we use these sorts of communications not as something I'm going to use sometime. I mean, could you be taking classes without Zoom right now? With going on 2 semesters without taking classes without Zoom? It'd be complicated, right? And my theory is also that Skype and FaceTime, the usage of Skype and FaceTime has probably been reduced. Do any of you still use Skype, for example, for anything? Just a show of hands. I don't. I don't even know if I still have it installed. Do any of you still use FaceTime to chat with friends or family? Some of you do. FaceTime is a little bit more because you've got it on your cell phone. It's a bit more.
No.
It's a bit more ubiquitous, or inherent there. So yeah, the premise for my science fiction novel is going to be that it's going to be that Zoom invented the virus. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I'm being taken away by a little girl. No. So that's my premise. If you want to write the novel, go ahead. Go ahead.
Maybe it's true.
I don't know, but it's really weird. We're using Zoom a lot. And suddenly Zoom is this kind of necessity. And I'm like, I mean, I don't know how the stocks for Zoom are right now, and internet companies also. But well, let's go on to happier things. So let's say employees have children. What would be the cardinality? What would be the cardinality there, do you think? Anybody?
One too many?
One to many, yeah. And it would make sense, the one to many, because as an employee, I can have many children. And by the way, we are looking at each employee individually. And usually, if you have a situation where there's more than one employee that are working in the same company that have children, you usually register them to one or the other. Okay, why? Because this has to do with insurance things. So let's say that it's one to many. So that means that a child will only be associated to a main tutor. Okay. What would be the minimum and maximum of that cardinality? What would be the minimum amount of children that that an employee could have?
One.
Well, that's kind of forceful. Would
Like
one be
None.
none?
0.
Yeah. Imagine you're working at a company where they're requiring you to have a child. So the minimum should be 0, okay? And the maximum amount of children could be how many? Let's put a reasonable number.
12.
12, yeah. I was reading an article, or my wife told me about, I think my wife told me about something she read that or my mother or something like that, about somebody that was having the goal that they wanted to have is that they wanted to have 20 children or something like that. So, and my wife and I were talking about that yesterday, that I don't know, we were seeing a documentary Alan V. Farrow documentary, and it was these families that used to have. I mean, my parents' families, some of our parents' families that used to have 12, 15 children, biological. And now it's not that common. Now it's usually families are smaller. Carmina, go ahead.
My uncle has 11 siblings, so they're 12. And I saw a documentary of a woman that had like 40 children.
That's a lot of free time. That is
Yeah.
a lot of free time, and probably not much Netflix or streaming services there to have. My favorite quarterback, Philip Rivers. I'm a huge Philip Rivers fans. I don't know the football guys, Diego, Jose Miguel, the football guys. Do you know how many children Philip Rivers has?
Like
Nine
nine,
There's
children.
9
yeah,
kids.
nine.
Philip, it's kind of a joke that's not very politically correct. I think they don't say it that much, but Philip Rivers has his whole offensive line ready with his children and his wife, so he could literally have his whole offense there with all of his children. He has, I think, 9 children, 9 or 10. Let's say that, and my parents, I think my father, half between half siblings and siblings. Yeah, it's a bunch of them. Also, it was more common before to have that. Yeah, I think Philip Rivers has 9 children, and so. But let's put a sort of reasonable number for a situation. Let's say that let's put it in this context. And I'm just speculating, by the way. I'm just speculating. Why is this relationship between entities important for a company? Why do you think? Why do you think a company needs to identify this? You own a company. Why do you need this information?
Well, for previously mentioned, sorry, let me turn on my camera. Well, for previously mentioned reasons for like insurance purposes, it's important to know how the employee's time is divided also from a company standpoint.
The main very, very cold reason, Ricardo, the second reason I hope you get, no, I don't hope, you're gonna get to be a very successful engineer. And if you go through the path of entrepreneurship, just because of what you said, you're hopefully going to be a great CEO and manager because you're thinking about the time of the employees. That's wonderful. The really cold reason is for insurance purposes, okay? And insurance policies. And I'm speculating because I'm not an expert on this, but I'm speculating that if there's an employee that suddenly you hire that has 20 children, I'm not sure that the insurance policies are probably going to have some sort of provisions regarding that, the amount of coverage you're going to have, I imagine. And so it's basically for that. It's a very cold reason. It has to do with insurance policies. So let's say that the minimum and maximum could be 0 and 4. Okay. Let's do one more before we do a break. Students and courses. Let's say students take courses. What would the cardinality, and let's say not courses, but classes, okay? And we just mentioned the difference between that. Estrella, go ahead.
You say one too many.
Mm-hmm. One to many, correct. And what would be a reasonable minimum and maximum for that? What would be the minimum amount of courses the student could take?
Like 6? Oh,
No,
minimum.
the minimum.
I know your memory. It's okay. 3? No?
Well,
1?
let's assume that it's a student that doesn't have, that this is not related to financial aid or anything like that. What would be the minimum amount of courses that you would need to take at a university or a school, at a university, let's say, for you to be considered a student?
1.
1. Yeah. So the minimum would be 1. You cannot, if you take 0 courses, you're not enrolled. So at least you have to take 1. And let's say, according to CETIS, let's say if you remember your rules and guidelines and policies, what's the maximum amount of courses you can take without needing any sort of special authorization classes? Does anybody remember that? There's a maximum amount.
6 or 7.
I believe that the maximum right now is 6. So if you enroll by yourselves, I believe you can select 6 courses, but if you want to select more than 6, you need a special authorization from your coordinator. Okay, we're gonna break here and we'll come back after 10 minutes. Okay, so the last one we're gonna see here, I'm going to specifically ask the football guys, the Legion of Zoom, that this time you guys aren't the Legion of Zoom. Oh, I got the COVID fuzzy brain. Remind me your house name, because it's not the
Analytical mastermind.
Analytical masterminds. Yeah. So yeah, we've got Javier, Diego, Miguel, and Jesus, if I'm not mistaken, right? Did I miss somebody? I think it's you guys. This is a question for you guys. Teams and games, but we're going to be specific. We're going to about teams in the NFL and games. And just as a note, these games include the playoffs or any possibility of playoffs. So what would the relationship be there? First off, anybody from analytical masterminds or football?
Many, I think.
Well, no relation. Let's, before we go to the card, that's a cardinality, but what would the relationship be? What would we put there?
Play games.
Play, yeah, that's directly right. It's, the teams play games. Okay, and what would be the cardinality there?
I think many to many.
It could be many to many in the sense that a game cannot be played by just one team, right? And teams play many games. Okay, so let's say that it's many to many. And if we're talking about the games in particular, what would be the minimum and the maximum?
Minimum of 16.
Let me write this down just to be clear. In the case of the teams, what would be the minimum and the maximum for each game?
1 and 2, only 2.
No, 2 and 2 actually. The minimum and the maximum is the same. You can't have a game without with just one team. And in the case of the games, I interrupted. What would be the minimum amount of games that a team could play?
16.
16. What could be the maximum amount of games a team could play?
I think it's 20 if they reach the Super Bowl.
Let's under the new rules, right?
Yeah, if it's a wild card team, it would be 20, and if it had a first round bye, it would be 19.
Yeah, so it's 20 games because they've added. Let's make that calculation. So if you're a wild card, it would be the wild card that you're playing. Then you would go to the divisional, then the conference, and then the Super Bowl. So it would be 4 more. So the maximum would be 20. Okay. So this is just kind of to practice how we interpret minimums, maximums, and cardinality. This might be different for other types of games or situations, right? Okay. Good. Okay. Some people in the way. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do, and I noticed that some of you already started doing this some of you already started doing this for the exercises that I asked, is that the next step is that once we've defined the relationships and once we've identified the cardinality, we want to establish the attributes for each entity, okay? And so what is an attribute? An attribute is going to be a name that is given to the characteristics or properties that an entity has. And basically, an entity is defined with regards to its attributes. So we can have an entity that's, for example, student. And what would be the attributes of a student? Well, your student ID, your name, your address, maybe your birthday. We could have an entity called a course, the course ID, the name, the hours, the units. We could have many types of entities, and each entity is going to have attributes, and these are going to be these characteristics or properties that are associated with. Now, it's important here, and this is going to be the next exercises we're going to be doing. It's important here to be able to note that there can be many attributes that I can give an entity. There could be many, many, many attributes. There could be an infinity of attributes that I can give an entity. For example, would you agree that a student is a person, right? So student ID is an attribute, name is an attribute, address, birthday. Would you agree that height could be an attribute? Weight, birthplace, hobbies, I don't know. But of those attributes, which of those am I going to select to really represent the entity? Well, I'm going to select those attributes that first off make sense within the context of the problem, and attributes that are going to eventually be able to provide information that's useful. So for example, I could say that height is an attribute of the entity student, right? But does it really make sense, or is it useful to include the height? Well, probably not. When you registered to set these, did they ask you your heights? No, right? But what if it was a medical registration? Well, your height might be important there, but for the context of the school, probably the height isn't that important. So there could be an infinity of attributes that I could identify for an entity. We only want to use those that make sense, okay? And I saw that some teams in some houses in the last exercise, the ones that have different problems that were assigned, you had already started identifying the attributes. That's actually going to be the next exercise that we're going to be doing. But we're only going to be focusing on the attributes that make sense within the context of the problem and that are necessary or useful for the eventual information that we're going to be trying to extract. Once we define the attributes, and this is something we had not discussed with more detail, is that once we establish the attributes for each entity, we need to identify what's called the primary key for the entity. Okay, what is the primary key for the entity? The primary key for the entity is going to be, it's an attribute of the attributes that I have defined. It's one attribute or a combination of attributes that are called key attributes or super key attributes. And it is an attribute that helps me identify in a unique way a registry, row, or in this case, to be clear with the concepts we were talking about, a registry or value for an entity, a registry, a value, or a specific value or for an entity, or a specific, I'm going to say it this way, a specific instance of the entity. And so, for example, in your cases, what would be the primary key for you guys as students? Well, it would be your student ID. Can somebody tell me why your names would not be an appropriate primary key? I'm gonna say something even more. Why would your birth date not be an appropriate primary key?
Because there are other students that have the same birthday.
Yes, correct, Andrea. There is a possibility, a real possibility and probability that there's more than one student with the same birth date. And so that would not help me. So let's say that Andrea, you have your birth date, and let's say that, I don't know, Javier has the same birth date. So I'm not going to be able to uniquely identify one from the other if the birth date is a primary key. Why is the name also not the best selection for a primary key?
For the same reason.
Same reason. Remember the anecdote I told you about, that there's another Jorge Sosa Lopez that has a shrimp boat?
Yeah.
And there's another Jorge Sosa Lopez that runs marathons. Well, that is actually me. That's my alter ego. We have exactly the same name, but we are not the same person. So the name doesn't make sense. So that's where, for example, for you guys as students, your student ID is a unique identifier. So for example, Carmina, what is your student ID?
33773. I'm sorry, I said it in Spanish.
I'm trying to translate it. 337.
773. 33773.
Oh, that's they gave you a very interesting one to learn.
Yeah,
So
I like it.
Yeah, mine actually is 11333. So I'm kind of half a devil. So it's 11333. It was easy. So wow, that's another thing that makes me old. So your student ID, Camille, starts with 33.
Yes.
Mine started with 11. So wow. Okay. And what is your student ID? Iskra, what is your student ID?
It's 34786.
34786. So there is only one 34786, and there is only one 33773. And we know that the first one is associated only and uniquely to Iskra, and the second one is associated only and uniquely to Carmina. And that is always going to persist. Those are never going to be reassigned. Okay, it's not like, going back to the football analogies, football guys, it's not like when you have a team and then you get Tom Brady on the team, and suddenly, well, whoever was on the team that had number 12 has to leave their number 12 because now it's Tom Brady's. Or vice versa. You have a player that has a number, and that number is going to change depending on the team. In this case, the identifier is unique, and that's what makes it the primary key for the entity. In the case of a course, the course has an ID, and that's what makes me clearly be able to identify or differentiate the differential calculus course from the data analysis and organization course. They have a specific ID. They have a specific attribute, that can be used to uniquely identify. What do you think would be a problematic situation with regards to primary keys and entities? I just gave you two examples where I think it's clearly stated that there's an attribute that can be a primary key. But what could be a problematic situation that we might face when we're defining entities and attributes? What do you think?
What was the question?
So again, I just gave you guys two examples with students in course where we defined attributes and we are able to identify a primary key. Because remember that we need a primary key, or else we're not going to be able to uniquely identify each of the elements in the entity. So what would be a problematic situation that we might find or be faced with when we're designing, when we're in this design phase?
Maybe if the primary key, I don't know how to say repeats. Yeah, repeats. No,
Well,
like in different attributes.
by a definition, we have to select a primary key that does not repeat itself. So that is one challenge. Right now in the examples I gave you, it was really easy. We're going to see other examples where it's not that easy to identify a primary key, or there might be many combinations of attributes that can give me a primary key because it has to be unique. Okay. Now, here in the case of employees and children, employees in a company have an employee number, so I can clearly identify them. But children don't have employee numbers. Would you agree? And if they do, that company is wrong. So there might be situations where I define an entity and there are no attributes in that entity that can be identified as a primary key. That's called a weak entity. It's an entity where I've got the attributes, but you know what? There isn't any of these attributes that can be identified as a primary key. I can't use any of them. When we have a weak entity where there isn't clearly an attribute that can be identified as a primary key, that entity usually depends on another one. Okay, and we need to either create a new attribute for it, or the relationship between the entities is going to create that attribute. And so remember when we were talking about the COVID-19 registration and we talked about vaccines? And remember that we said that the attributes for a vaccine would be, for example, the type. And remember that we had also talked about another attribute that I think was the manufacturer. And then I think somebody said inventory, right? You remember that? And remember when we were talking about the vaccine that I asked, well, but how can I clearly identify the specific vaccine that I'm giving to somebody? And I think somebody said, well, we might need to add a serial number or something to the vaccine. If I define the vaccine this way, if this is the definition of, remember that vaccine right now here is the entity. Okay. And the type, the manufacturer, and the inventory, these are the attributes. Okay. As it is right now, this is a weak entity, right? Would you agree with that? Because there isn't an attribute of the ones I have defined that can clearly identify one instance of that entity from another. And so I need to probably add another attribute that might be a serial number. Or we had actually talked about a code. Okay, a code. And in this sense, when we have the serial number or a code, we've turned the weak, we've eliminated the weak part of the entity. Okay, the entity doesn't have is no longer a weak entity. The example here, another example is employee and children. So I, as an employee, have an identifier, which is my employee number. So let's say that the attributes are my employee number and, for example, my name. And let's say that another one is my address. What would be the primary key there? My employee number. This is the primary key. Okay. But now let's say that this is employee. Now let's say that for children, the attributes are just going to be their names and their birth date. Okay. If the only attributes the children have are the name and the birth dates, then it's a weak entity because there isn't anything that can clearly identify the child uniquely, because there could be two children that would have the same name. It's improbable, but possible. And with the same birth date. Again, improbable, but possible. And the improbable but possible situations, this is a kind of a rule of life, and it's one of the Sosa rules also. The improbable but possible things in life, when they occur, those are the things that really create problems for us. And this also applies in databases. Would you agree that it was improbable for a pandemic to occur? How many of you would agree with that? It was improbable for a pandemic to occur as it occurred. Would you agree that it was possible? It was possible. So the improbable possible things in life, when they occur, those are the ones that really generate problems. And so we would need to create some sort of ID here to be able to turn this weak entity into an entity that's not weak. Okay, and this would be this would be kind of the example of that. Okay. Now let's see some examples of this, and we've got an example here. Let me go over here. There we go. Clear this. Give me a moment. And I'm going to go through an example here. Give me a moment to refresh my PowerPoint here. Here we go. Remember that we were talking about Sosa Corp. Okay. Give me a moment here. There we go. Remember that we were talking about Sosa Corp, which is this global company that does things. Has local footprint, offers goods and services, and we want to manage information relating our employees' departments as different projects. And we had been given previously a description of the company and some information there regarding how it's organized in departments. The department has an identifier. The department manages a fixed amount of projects. We have employees that have certain attributes, and these are also linked to employees' work and manage projects. And there are also dependents of the employee that are required for insurance purposes. And from that, we had established the entities and the relationships. We had only done this. We had only done these two steps. So we had identified 4 entities: employee, department, project, and dependent. And we had identified the relationships. Employee is assigned to a department, employee manages a department, employee supervises an employee works on a project, an employee has dependents, and a department manages a project. These are the different relationships that have been established for this situation. And so now, how could we identify the cardinality? And here are some examples when we're going to be working on this, how to identify cardinality. And So with regards to cardinality, we kind of asked some questions. How many employees can be assigned to a department? How many departments can an employee be assigned to? And so how many employees can be assigned to a department? One or many. So the minimum and the maximum. How many departments can an employee be assigned to? One or one, minimum and maximum. And from the maximums, this is kind of a systematic way to do this. From the maximums is where we're going to be able to get the relationship. Sometimes we're going to say n to 1 or 1 to n. It means the same thing. It's just to be able to know which one goes where, or which one goes in what direction we're talking about. Same thing for employee manages a department. How many employees can manage a department? One or one. How many departments can an employee manage? 0 or 1. And so grabbing the maximums, we have the relationship. An employee supervises an employee. How many employees can supervise another employee? 0 or 1. How many employees can have other employees under their supervision? 0 or many. From the maximums, we can establish the relationship. That's another way of doing it. So the way we did it before, it's kind of by common sense, but we could also do it that way by asking these questions. An employee works on a project. How many employees can work on a project? One or many. How many projects can an employee work on? 0 or many. From the maximums, we have that the relationship is n to m, or many to many. Lastly, an employee has dependents. How many dependents can be had? How many employees can be had by a dependent? 1 or 1. This is considering that we're only assigning one tutor. How many dependents can an employee have? 0 or n. From the maximums, we can establish the relationship. A department manages a project. How many departments can manage a project? 1 or 1. How many projects can a department manage? 1 or many. From the maximums, we can define the relationship. Okay. So this is kind of a more systematic way of doing it. So if we ask those two questions, it's one question going from from entity A to B, and the other question is asking from entity B to A. And defining those maximums and minimums, we can automatically establish the type of relationship there is. And also this is going to be within the context of the problem. And so this is kind of the summary of the relationships we identify. And now we establish the attributes for each entity. So from the definition of the problem, an employee has a social security number, a name, an address, a salary, a gender, a birth date, a status, if he or she is a manager or not, and if he or she is a manager, their start date. Can somebody tell me what the primary key could be for this entity? What would be the primary key for this entity, for the entity employee? Remembering that the primary key is an attribute that can help me uniquely identify each instance of that entity.
The social security number?
The social security number, correct, Brian. The social security number is going to be unique. That was an ugly line, wasn't it? The social security number is going to be unique for that entity. For the department, what would be the primary key for the department?
The ID.
The department ID, correct, Carmen. That uniquely identifies the department. The project, what would be the unique identifier for the project that would be the primary key?
Also the ID.
Also the ID, correct, Yesel? So these would be our primary keys. What's the problem with the dependent? As I just defined if I just define the dependent with name, gender, and relationship, what's the problem there?
That doesn't have like a primary key to identify it. You call it week? How?
Correct, perfect. Carmina, this is a weak entity. And for now, we're just going to identify it as weak. Okay? We're not going to make fun of it. We're just going to identify it as weak. There's going to be a procedure, or there's going to be guidelines as to how to establish or eliminate that situation of making it weak. But for now, we're just going to identify it as weak. Okay? And so this is what we were talking about. These are the primary keys. The primary keys are the pink ones. And we've just identified this one as a weak entity. Okay. And we've identified or established these attributes. Okay. Questions here before we take a pause.
No.
I'm good.
Okay. I'm gonna stop the sharing for a moment and take a pause here. Okay. The exam, we've got exam next Tuesday. Yay, it's that moment in the semester where you guys get to demonstrate that you learned things. And this is so exciting. I'm going to pause the recording